More federal charges, not unexpected, and the legislative scandals continue. Rolling the dice at Russellville, pot limit in Pope County, anteing up in Little Rock. Those dark clouds so many see elsewhere, are they visible here? But first, the scores of small-scale Arkansas dams and the major damage that can follow if they fail. An update coming up on Arkansas Week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. A fresh federal indictment alleging malfeasance at the state capitol. We'll cover that. And the ongoing dispute over casino gambling in a county that voted no. But up top, they're taken for granted until the water really rises, and last spring, the water did. Flooding along the Arkansas pushed many of Arkansas's levees to their limit and beyond. The damage, actual or narrowly averted, prompted Governor Hutchinson to impanel a task force to study the state of and the stewardship of our levees. Mr. Hutchinson, in making that announcement, made his dissatisfaction obvious.
This is not simply a state responsibility, and there's a balance here. The Corps of Engineers build the levee system. They turn it over to local control and local levee boards. And those levee boards have been responsible historically for maintenance, for levying assessments, and making sure the levees are in proper condition. That system has not worked well. Because of they thought the levee's fine, so they disbanded. They didn't want to tax themselves for whatever reason. And so over time, we get to the situation we're in now.
Mr. Hutchinson in a mid-June announcement. Joining us now, Jamie Cook, Secretary of the Arkansas Department of Public Safety, who is also chair of the Levee Task Force, and Senator Jason Rapert of Conway, a member of that task force. Mr. Rapert, let me go to you first because you have some hands-on experience with this, and it has to be said you were probably the first to sound the alarm several years ago about this situation.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us on the show, and thank you for covering the topic. My introduction to this really came firsthand in 2015. That's when we had one of the highest historic crests on the Arkansas River that we've had in many years. In 15, I discovered at that point, because I had land that now was along the Arkansas River, I discovered that some of the water that was entering that area over there really was coming in through a breach that had occurred in 1990 and had never been fixed. And so I decided it was time for us to take a look at this, so I began inquiring of all of the people that I felt like were stakeholders that should have something to say on the issue. So I approached the Corps of Engineers. That's when I found out the Corps of Engineers says our authority stops and our responsibility right there where those floodgates begin on what was then the Perry County Levee District. So I began to talk to the counties. Well, it wasn't the county's responsibility, and found out there was a board that had had responsibility for that levee, but they had not been operational in many, many years. And so then in 16, around January the 1st, we had a second flood. Again, that water's pouring right back in the same place. And so that was my introduction to that, where I began to get an education on how problematic it is. The bottom line is that after we found all of these things, I reached out to Governor Hutchinson, of course, to talk to him about the issue, and we had a special session in which we included some legislation to address defunct levee boards. Because what was happening is no one had the authority to get them functioning again. And so the legislation that we passed took one step to try to get these functioning again. That was that a county judge can reappoint members of those defunct levee boards. And then it's up to the levee board then to begin to do the work to either go get grants, to assess themselves, whatever they need to do to get their levees back up to par. And I would say all of them should hope that you get yourself to the level that you could be taken into a federal system. So for all of these years in Perry County, and people that live there know this, you would have danger of the roads closing. You had all of these problems that were occurring from the river flooding. Well, now that they had a levee board, they went out, got a loan, got a grant, and they were able to fix those levee breaches and put in new floodgates. Unfortunately, with the latest Arkansas River flood being the worst that we've seen probably since 1927, it overtopped that levee. The good news for that levee board and that community is, though, that the federal government now will help with 80% of the repair because they have a functioning federal levee that has now been taken into that system. And they call it a non-federal levee because they didn't build it, but yet it is in their system as an active levee. And this is the case. There are over, I think, 98 levees in the state of Arkansas.
We think?
Yeah, we think. And about 38 of those we know are not up to standards. They're unacceptable. And so I think there's an awakening happening across the country and also in our state that we've got to pay attention to this infrastructure. And it's not just about agriculture land and just not about keeping a highway open. Over $1 billion a year goes up and down the Arkansas River in commerce up to the port of Catoosa in Oklahoma. And right now in our state, these water systems and the levee systems that protect the areas outside of the navigation channel are critical infrastructure we've got to pay attention to.
Ms. Cook, is it fair to say, Director Cook, Secretary Cook, is it fair to say that we, at this moment, we don't know what we don't know about Arkansas's levee system?
I think that we know a lot, but I think there's a lot to learn. And that's part of the charge of this task force, is to determine what we know and what we don't know and put it all together in a great snapshot report card, per se, for the state of Arkansas and the function of our levees, the status of our levees, and like Senator Raper was talking about, on our levee boards. And so that's part of the charge of this task force that we're gathering information on now.
Well, Mr. Raper, your legislation specified that there be that levee board or county clerks, I think, report the status of their levees.
That's right.
And the participation was fewer than, if I'm calculating correctly, 1 in 5 even bothered to respond.
That's correct. Now what that tells you, number one, there probably is no board functioning to give a report to even make that happen. So there is some good things that we yield out of their non-participation or non-compliance. For those that are there that weren't complying, I'm hearing that they're beginning to send those reports in, because that bill also had a little bit of a stick, which said you could be fined or they could withhold funds from grant programs, maybe related to the state, if they're not compliant. And here's the thing, the state has no interest in fining people or anything of this nature, but we do need the county judges and all of the county officials in those counties to understand we've got to have data on these levees so that we can try to bring to bear some resources and partnership opportunities to help. The thing is that a lot of people back in the day when they first put these levees in place, they knew how important they were. But we've reached a point, even in my own district here in Conway, Faulkner County, the Lolly levee that was protecting Western Conway, most of the people in Conway up to this latest event really didn't understand the protection that that levee was for West Conway. It's out of sight, it's out of mind. And the same thing goes for areas even towards Little Rock. We were in a meeting here just a couple of days ago. There's a Woodson levee I'm told about. It's a critical levee down there. And so what we did in 16 was a step toward that direction, but what we see now is that we need to take a little bit more refined look at this to try to make sure people understand you got to have a board in place to make the system work. And so that's step number one, is getting people responsible at the local levee that will step up and make sure things are done.
I think it's fair to say that Arkansas got lucky during the spring floods because several levees were topped, but only one significantly breached, and we have some, that was a section, about an 8-mile section, I believe, according to the State Highway Department, of Highway 155 in Yell County. Basically, there's an 8-mile section of Highway 155. That particular section, according to the Highway Department, carries approximately 700 vehicles per day. Small in the grand scheme of things, unless you consider that some of them may be ambulances or emergency vehicles, whatever. And that levee breach resulted in two, hesitate to say, the highway department doesn't call them pools, they call them ponds. One is 40 feet deep, another is about 40 or 100 feet deep, and it will require hundreds of thousands of dollars in state funds to repair. So, Director Cook, this is a statewide issue. That's money that could have been spent elsewhere by the highway department.
It absolutely is a statewide issue, and I think that's why it's so critical that we had the task force created. It's created of just an array of subject matter experts that have interest and expertise in all of these things, because it's not just a local 700 cars like you're talking about. I mean, this affects our entire state, and we have to be ready and prepared and to mitigate this in the future. And that's what the charge of this task force is to make sure that we cover all of our bases, identify our strengths, identify our weaknesses, figure out our gaps, and how we go forth from here.
One of the gaps may well prove to be funding, because, as Mr. Rapert has pointed out, and others have pointed out, some of these levee boards are in areas of the state where the tax base has basically, other than local property tax, has disappeared.
That's right.
So, and Mr. Hutchinson acknowledged as much too, that funding repairs is going to be very difficult.
Well, the key to this now is that in
maintaining, I should say maintenance and repairs.
The key to this now, and the difference now, in 15, as you mentioned, there was hardly anyone raising a voice. And so it took a lot of effort to try to get people to even pay attention and why this was important. What we have now is we've got a governor who absolutely sees this as critical and is crucial to the state's future. And we have Secretary Cook, who has one of the most important obligations and responsibilities now, which is this task force. And I'm glad she's been appointed by the governor to do this. It's very important. In fact, a lot of great things I've loved being a part of, but this issue, if we do it right, could absolutely fundamentally change maybe even the future of Arkansas and how we're able to manage these resources, but absolutely will have a critical impact on whether we're able to utilize areas that have been in agricultural production, areas and communities where people have lived. This flood event absolutely flooded out homeowners in my district and up and down the Arkansas River Valley that had never had water in their homes before. I talked to people, I sandbagged homes in my own community where they really didn't think they needed a sandbag, and they lost their home. Now, we've been able to get FEMA in there to help them with resources. We've even had, and thank God for good-hearted Arkansas people, they've given private donations to help them. But this issue is critical because here's where we're at today. Many areas of the state are more vulnerable today than we were before this flood event. The breaches that are in the system now have less protection. And so here we are, we're doing our jobs with the task force, but right now, if we have another even minor flood event in some areas, it's going to hit homes, it's going to take over some roads. And so we need the federal government, and I've delivered this message personally to Senator Bozeman and Senator Cotton. We need them to be strong advocates to get the Corps of Engineers to work with us.
That means money.
That means money. And you know what? And I hope they watch your program, because I've talked with those engineers and the Corps people. They're used to being told we don't have any money, and they've always shelved. And here we are with a crumbling levee infrastructure, and they've always been told no more money. I've said you need to raise your voice now. Bring out the plans that you thought you never could pay for, because you have political momentum that understands the necessity of this. We need them to think outside of the box, because I told them, if your protocol continues to be that when all of these factors come together, you just open the gates and flush the state of Arkansas, that is not a plan for 3 million Arkansans.
But Secretary Cook, you've got a deadline, I think, to submit a report, your inventory. Will you meet it?
Absolutely. Our deadline's December 30th. Our goal is to have that report delivered well in advance of that, a couple of weeks. And we've divided our task force into 4 teams to meet the 4 objectives in the executive order, and they're meeting very frequently, and we already have some very good ideas and suggestions for recommendations on how we move forward. So we will absolutely meet that deadline, and it'll be a report that's usable, that'll have deliverables in it, and we're very excited about it.
When you submit that report in the new year, will you both come back?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Secretary Cook, Senator Rayford. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
AE10 has launched the Arkansas Citizens Access Network, ARCAN, an online website that gives everyone a front row seat to state governments, meetings, boards, commissions, and other proceedings. They're streamed live, these meetings, and archived for 30 days. So stay tuned to see what's coming up in the days ahead. And we're back now with Christopher Hausnick from the Arkansas Tech Political Science faculty and Wesley Brown from Talk Biz and Politics. Wesley, have you gone to cash yet? From stocks? Arkansas stats still looking pretty good, but to read the National Economist, there's a little iffy.
Yeah, things are in the economy are getting soft. The Bureau of Labor Statistics report came out yesterday that said the former robust job growth that we thought had taken place over the last 12 months, which had averaged about 223,000 per month, is now been revised down to about 180,000 per month. That means that about a 500,000 jobs in the U.S. economy, the job growth that we thought had occurred over the last 12 months was revised downward by 500,000, 500,000 people.
Yeah. Do you, and of course the interest rate lottery continues. Do you detect in Arkansas business, that's a broad brush, but any slowdown, any reluctance, antsiness?
Yeah, I do. Especially with the trade situation, also with the GDP slowing down, the domestic product slowing down. Last month it was 2.2. We will get another report on August 29th that shows probably will, and I think the forecast now is that GDP growth will be about still at 2.2% for the second quarter. So you've had over the previous month 3.3% growth. GDP growth over the last 18 months, and now you see the economy starting to break, and also as you noted, the interest rate question, what will the Fed do? That question is always out there, and the impact is the reality is that we have an economy that is breaking, and what is the federal government of the Trump administration going to do to get it going back again?
Yeah, or the Fed if it does.
Yeah.
And there's also this, I have to say I think it's fair to say, not unexpected additional indictments in the case involving another state or former Senator Hutchinson now.
Yeah, just the ongoing saga of this was related to his plea agreement. He actually in 3 jurisdictions, one in Little Rock, one in Fayetteville, and one in Springfield, Missouri. In the one in Northwest Arkansas, a dentist or orthodontic medicine practitioner, I think his name was Ben Burris, was indicted. He had, the federal prosecutor said he had offered Jeremy Hutchinson about $160,000, $170,000 in bribery for certain legislation that would promote his dental practice. He had several offices in Northwest Arkansas. This actually was a Florida-based doctor, but he had practices here in Arkansas.
And a side note to that is that it keeps, not that it was in danger of going away, but it keeps that issue before the public.
Yeah, and if you look at the 20-page indictment, there were several unnamed people that are still out there that they were referred to in the indictment. So those people could come up again, and it probably will impact the state legislatures, the General Assembly.
And I'd agree with that, because Arkansas had another bribery scandal in Northwest Arkansas. So for the last 18 months, you've had questions about business ethics, legislators taking bribes, things of that nature. And even though this is a long-standing thing, it's still not a good face to put on the state.
Keeps the jaundice alive anyway. Now, Chris, no indictments, no allegations of wrongdoing or wrongdoing in Pope County.
I would go allegations.
The casino story keeps lingering.
Yes, and it will linger. You got to get comfortable for the fall. You've had basically, it was on today, Legends, the one who was granted the Quorum Court's seal of approval, turned in their application. The Arkansas Racing Commission has opened the application period up, so others are allowed to. County judge has said, I'm not going to write any other letters, but as far as the process, they have to leave the window open. And that is where that window being open may actually help this in some strange way, because the real question at the state level is Gulfside versus the Arkansas Racing Commission. Gulfside is arguing that this one-line letter that an outgoing lame duck county commission, Quorum Court justice wrote, well, I should be able to build it. And even though he's on videotape rescinding the letter, that's going to give 90 days, and I would expect the word expedited proceedings and things like that to come up a fair amount, to see how that all plays out over the fall.
Yeah, I think the Arkansas Racing Commission opened the application process for 90 days, and as you said, you've got one application already in. Again, I think you're going to get probably the previous 4 that applied, Gulfside, and the other 3, one, the Choctaw, and then you have the Cherokee Nation, and then you have a group out of Iowa that are probably going to reapply. And you may, if they reopen the process, you could get several more applicants. It doesn't preclude that from happening. I guess the bottom line is that I think this is going to be a legal battle. You got the Gulfside complaint out there, and you got other potential. You got L4I issue in Polk County. I think it's going to be like the medical marijuana. It's going to be a legal fight for 2 years, and we may not see.
And as Wes mentioned, Chris, there's a transparency question now.
Yeah, I was
not new, but I mean,
it's a very strange relationship, because people have brought up, there was, at the 11th hour, there was this group who came forward. We saw members of the Quorum Court and Judge Cross meet 3 times over the last 2.5 months without notifying the public. This got a little bit bigger. The superintendent of Russellville School District was brought in, and those are, that's an important question. Who was meeting? What were they talking about?
His concern, of course, being property tax revenue.
Yes, and basically, don't
impact.
Yes, exactly. I think the reason I've sort of wrestled with this is because they are right that they may have violated the law.
Open Meetings Act. Yeah.
The Open Meetings Act. But the issue I run into is that if you really follow the letter of the law, you are saying what would be better by the law is that Judge Cross should meet individually with 5 casino operators with no oversight, nobody else there, don't consult anybody, and make a decision alone on what casino comes to Polk County. That becomes, it's a different kind of problem. That would be legal, but not, follow the sunshine laws, but it becomes, well, then you have possibilities for what was talked about behind closed doors as well. And that's where one of the things that sort of tainted this question is, as we said, the first meetings were in June, and these were the affidavits were sent to the Western District, Western Federal District of Arkansas, down to the Arkansas Attorney General's office. They witnessed an illegal meeting and notified nobody until 2 months later when they lost.
Well, I know one way to bring some sunshine.
I guess
I think
the question is if the prosecuting attorney in that county is going to prosecute. That's the bottom line on this open record. So I mean, I think the Open Record Act is really clear. I mean, in terms of how a meeting is supposed to, if you have 2 or more people that meet, then that's considered a meeting, and they had more than a half a dozen. So I think that bottom line on that is pretty clear.
The statute and the Supreme Court has stripped any ambiguity away from that act anyway. Are we ever going to see casinos?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
You sure? All right. Okay. Odds?
No, I think somebody will get. There's our perspective is this is something the state voted on, and this is a state revenue stream. You've got racing gambling in 2 locations. You've got casino gambling already in 2 locations, and they've already got grounds in shovels to the ground at Pine Bluff. There will be a casino in Polk County. The state wants the revenue stream. You're talking millions of dollars. We were just in your previous segment, you're talking about, spending money for levies. Well, gambling money spends just the same as sales tax money. So you'd be able to have those kind of projects. So I think at the long run, you're going to get a casino in Pope County. What it is, how it comes about, as I said last time, this is going to be the courts for decide, and who wins all these legal wranglings, arguments, affidavits, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe that, as he said, there's a complaint by Gulf side. I think that's gonna be the real issue that clogs up the pipeline for a long time. You may get some decisions on who the actual casino operator is going to be, but that legal issue is still going to be out there.
Yeah, you got to end it there. We're out of cards. Thanks, gentlemen, for coming in. As always, we thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.